Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heather Amos. I work at the University of British Columbia's Public Affairs Office. I'm their Senior Media Relations Specialist. And for those of you who are from out of town, welcome to Vancouver, and thanks for joining us. So I'll start off by just talking a little bit about what my role is at UBC. Our office is in charge of sharing the stories about the research, the work, the milestones that are happening at the university with the news media and also with the general public. We run a website called news.ubc.ca where we post all of our stories to. My focus in the office is on health and related disciplines like dentistry, that sort of thing, and the sciences. So those are my main two areas that I work in. And basically what that means is my role is to kind of bridge the gap between the research that's happening in those schools and in those faculties with the news media. We work with international, national, and local news media. And we do this two ways. First is reactively, which I'm not going to speak too much about today, but we do get a lot of calls from journalists looking for researchers who are able to comment on the news of the day. We run an experts database where researchers or professors are able to sign up, let journalists know what their specialty is, sustainability, transportation, politics, that sort of thing, so that journalists can find them quickly. We also will be paying attention to common subjects that are in the news. For example, last summer there was a drought and really hot weather here in Vancouver, so we did a Q&A with one of our salmon researchers about the impact of this heat wave kind of on our salmon populations. And then when there's breaking news, whether it's policy change, something like Zika virus, we'll put together a list of researchers who are available that day or over the coming days who are able to speak to the subject matter. But really what I'm here to talk to you about today is our proactive work. So the work we do to tell the story of the research that's happening at the university. So often what happens is I get sent a journal publication like this one, and my job is to take a look at it and try to pull out what are the most newsworthy findings and find a narrative or a story that makes sense to the general public. So here we put out a news release about the scientific publication. We send it to reporters, and then the hope is that we get lots of news coverage, for example, locally and internationally. Here's another example, very similar. Again, a research publication being published in Nature. If you don't mind, take a look at the date, January 19th, 2016. So again, took a look at the paper, tried to pull out the news findings, put together a news release, which we issued on the same date of the publication. And the reason I'm stressing this is because what makes news is that it's new, and often the best opportunity to tell proactive stories about the research that's happening at the university is when that research is published for the first time, when it becomes publicly available. So we try as much as possible to time our releases to go at the same time as when the embargo lifts. And I'll talk more about that. Actually, I think we'll all talk a lot about that in this presentation. So again, lots of news coverage internationally and locally. Here's another example. This one is actually not tied to a research publication. This is one of our public health professors, and he was presenting at a conference, the annual meeting for the American Association for the Advancement of Science, or AAAS. And what's interesting here is that we're often looking for other milestones in the research process to tell the research story. And presenting at a major conference in your field is a great opportunity. What can also add to that is when you time a journal publication to come out at the same time as a conference presentation, so you can leverage one for the other. For us, when researchers present at conferences, they're often not in Vancouver, so it gives us an opportunity to work with new journalists or reach a new audience that we wouldn't otherwise get to. In this case, like I said, this was a presentation at AAAS. AAAS attracts lots and lots of journalists. It has a very robust news program. And what they've done is put together a press kind of package where they highlight the stories that probably are of the most news interest and share them with journalists. So this study was selected for a press briefing, so we issued a news release and put together a quick video to let journalists know what the findings are. So I'm just going to play this video quickly. It's less than 2 minutes long.
We're studying air pollution in the context of a large study called the Global Burden of Disease Study. One of the surprises to us is that air pollution is one of the leading risk factors for death and disease around the world. The estimates are 5.5 million people every year are dying as a result of air pollution. So we have both outdoor air pollution, which is contributed by sources such as power plants, vehicle exhaust, land clearing for agriculture, and then also what we call household air pollution. And that is people using open fires or very inefficient stoves for cooking and heating. This is primarily a problem in rural areas of developing countries of the world. Of the 5.5 million deaths that we estimate in 2013 that are caused by exposure to air pollution around the world, 3 million of those deaths, so more than half, are in China and India. One of the reasons that we're focused particularly on China and India is that the sources that contribute to air pollution are also major sources contributing to climate change. And by highlighting the health impacts of air pollution, we're hoping to catalyze a faster shift away from these dirtier sources to cleaner energy sources for these countries. So one of the unique things about air pollution is that you can't run, you can't hide from it. But we know that if you improve air quality, everybody benefits. So from a health perspective, reducing levels of air pollution is actually an incredibly efficient way to improve the health of the entire population.
So that was just a quick video that we produced. In terms of a time commitment on our part, it took about an hour to film that, and I was just learning how to edit at the time, so maybe 2 hours to put that together, so it was very little time investment on our part. And again, we got lots of news pickup, lots of international interest, and in particular, what was really exciting for me was that the video was used verbatim in news stories. It was just embedded into the online versions of the Washington Post, the New York Times, that sort of thing, so it was quite a success. Now, of course, our goal in our office is to work with the news media, to work with journalists, but as a result of that, we're also really speaking to the general public. So more and more, we're relying on tools that other people, or social media tools that other people are using to get their news from. So videos on YouTube, for example, and then, of course, Twitter, Facebook are great ways to share stories. So I'm going to get into our process a little bit, but before I get there, I thought I should talk a little bit about why the researchers might want to speak to media, why we encourage them to work with media when they have an interesting story coming out. So first off, there's kind of a reason to do it from the public education or public outreach perspective. A lot of the research funding in Canada comes from taxpayer dollars through granting agencies. So there is a little bit of an onus on us to report back to the general public about what their money is being used for and how they can use this information in their own daily lives. Some of our professors really like to work with media because they're hoping to drive policy change. They're providing the evidence to inform policy decisions, and the only way to really bring awareness to their research, or one of the best ways, is through the media. Sometimes our researchers are looking for participants in research or just community support. Working with the media can help attract grad students. It can help attract collaborators from other areas. It can help attract funders. Sometimes with grants, the funder requires the researchers to do some form of knowledge translation, and media outreach is one way to do that. And then, of course, it can be fun and rewarding. Some of our researchers really, really like speaking to the media, which is always great when we find those people. So, as promised, getting into the process a little bit. So our first job is to find good stories. So we're looking for stories with strong news values. And I think Linda is probably going to speak to you a little bit more about what are the news values that reporters are looking for. But one thing I will stress again is that timeliness is key. So reporters are looking for a news hook, a reason to tell this story right now. And often, like I said, this is when a publication is being published or a researcher might be presenting at a conference, that sort of thing. So we really heavily rely on advance notice from publishers that there is a story coming out that our researchers are involved in. Sometimes we get notifications from the journal or through services like Eureka Alert, and sometimes we get them from the researchers directly. Sometimes they'll just call us up because they like to speak to media, they've worked with us before, but sometimes the journals ask them to reach out to us or put us in touch. One caveat here is that if we're going to work with a researcher on a news release and through this whole process, it's very, very important that they are actually willing to speak to media. There are some that you will never convince that this is a good idea and that they're just not interested. So obviously that's not a good opportunity to reach out to media. We want to make sure that the people are available and willing to take those interview requests. And we also rely on colleagues who are working in the faculties and departments. I'm a central unit. We're not located anywhere near any of the research that's happening at the university, so we really rely on people who are, sharing the same hallway space, coffee space, break rooms to tell us about stories that we may not be aware of. So when we hear about a story, well, I should say that I used to have a colleague who would always say, all stories are worthy, but not all stories are newsworthy. And we have to take that into consideration when we're working with researchers. So kind of the first thing that we do is we have an interview or a conversation with the researcher to find out about a little bit more about their studies. Often when I'm sent a paper, it's hard for me to pull out what is the newsworthy finding. Often the science is over my head. Over my head. So I really depend on the researcher to kind of tease that out for me. From there, we determine whether the story has news value and what our outreach strategy, if any, there will be. So are we going to put out a news release? Are we going to do a Q&A? Are we just going to send a note to our reporter saying this is a story I think you will be interested in? If we decide to go the route of a news release, we draft and edit with the researcher's input. I can't go through the whole kind of strategies to write a good news release, but I would say keep it short. Reporters don't have a long time to read through a lot of content, and you also have to leave some space for them to tell their own version of the story that you're suggesting. Furthermore, you need to get to the point right away. What are the findings? What is actually new here that no one knew about before? Don't put that at the very end of the news release, put it at the top. For a lot of you, I'm sure you're aware of that. Once we're kind of working on the news release, we have to work with the researchers to coach and prepare them for interviews. We want to make sure that they can answer questions about their research in a way that makes sense to an informed teenager. So they have to get rid of the jargon. They have to be able to make the complicated uncomplicated. We always make sure that they can answer the questions, what did you find? So what, or what are the implications of this work, and where do you go from here? How is this going to inform your next move in terms of research? We try to get them to figure out analogies or other ways of explaining complicated things. There's also a process of explaining a little bit about what their day is going to look like when we send out the news release, because it can be very time-consuming. There can be a lot of demands from the news media. A lot can change very quickly. So we want to make sure that they've set aside some time, that they're going to be available, they're going to be checking their emails that day, and we also get a cell phone number so that we can reach them if they, go missing, so to speak. And then as we're going through that process, we might think about what else we can add to the story. For example, if it's a health story, do we need a patient perspective? Do we need a third-party validator from another university or NGO, for example? Are there videos that we can provide, pictures, infographics, that sort of thing? So once all that material is prepared, it's about trying to get the news out there. So before the embargo lifts, we'll use services like Eureka Alert or Alpha Galileo to post our news releases and media materials under embargo. I think Brian's going to give you a background on what Eureka Alert is, but essentially it's a way to communicate with trusted science and health reporters. We might pitch to reporters that we work with frequently to say, hey, this is coming out. You might be interested in the story, so that they know they can set aside some time before the story is actually released to the general public, and they can make sure they have the time to work on a good story. We distribute our news release to our own list of reporters who've signed up to receive our news. We don't use any newswire services or contact lists prepared by other people. Partially, this is a funding decision. We put out a lot of news. We couldn't really afford to put everything on the newswire. But it's also partially because over the years we've developed a really strong list of reporters who want to receive our news, and they have signed up to be on our distribution list. And for the most part, I think they are actually reading our emails and opening them. And then when the embargo lifts or when the journal article comes out, we'll post the release on our website, share it on social media, that sort of thing. And there might be some more pitching where we work with reporters who we think will be interested in the story. Here's an example of one of our stories that's posted on Eureka Alert. And you'll see at the very top what the public release date is. So that's important. You're probably wondering, how long does this process take? Well, it varies. Honestly, we can do it in a day or two. We may not have all the materials together if we don't have a lot of warning, but we can work very quickly. However, it's much better if we can do it with a couple weeks or even a few weeks' notice. We have a lot more time to work with, we're able to get things right, and we're able to provide those other materials that journalists seem to be looking for these days. Of course, I should talk a little bit about challenges. So the news industry has taken a huge hit recently. There are fewer reporters in the newsroom. There are fewer specialized reporters who are interested in things like health and science. And of course, there are fewer resources available to them. They have less time to work on stories because more is expected of them. I'm sure Linda can talk more about this. But that just means that we have to be more prepared. We need to have the patients lined up. We can't leave it to the journalists, necessarily go trying to find someone who can offer that patient perspective. We need to have the videos available, so if a journalist can't make it out to campus to do their own filming, they have B-roll and footage available to them. We're trying to be a little bit more flexible and not rely so heavily on news releases all the time. It seems a little bit outdated. So again, we're using Q&As or social media, videos to tell the stories too. And then, UBC is a very, very big school. We get lots of great research. So we're actually inundated with lots of great story ideas coming our way. So we have to be very careful that we don't overload journalists by sending them everything. We have to use strong news judgment and really whittle it down to really the best stories that we're going to send out. So I'll leave it there because we're going to do questions later, and I think Brian is up next.